Hey guys, it's Chili B here again. Today we're diving into Halls of Olympia and taking a first look at it. They're a pretty early stage project and they've only got a light paper so far, so this won't be a deep dive, but more just going through the light paper and giving you my first impressions. Also a quick thank you to Yams from Halls of Olympia and Lizard from Ethlizards, of course, for helping me to piece together some trickier parts of this project. As always, this isn't financial advice. You already know you should do your own due diligence. It's your money, it's your responsibility. Alright, this is their light paper. It's probably a fair bit out of date because a lot of things have happened between when this was written and now, but the basics of it I think are still the same, so we'll go through it as is. First thing to note is that this project was started by OG Ohmies, which is an interesting starting point for a game project. If you're not aware of Ohm or of Olympus DAO, it was a massive protocol in the DeFi 2 wave, who I think invented, or at the very least they made popular, the rebase mechanism, where you lock your tokens in and it preserves your portion of ownership of the whole protocol despite inflation. And incidentally, Ethlizards are using it for their staking mechanism as well. So it's a strange place for a gaming project to originate. That might explain why they say they're hoping to achieve success in product design, economic construction, programming, marketing, and game development. Most of the other games that we've invested in seem to be pure play games, where they're making a really good game, and if it's a really good game, we'll make a lot of money. But this one's a little bit different. So keep that in mind as we dive into the project a bit. According to their light paper, they've got three kind of main pillars that they're trying to build. The first one is metaverse experiences, which will include some element of VR. Second one is sporting events, and I'm assuming that's electronic sporting events. And then betting, which will be built on top of the sporting events, I'm guessing, inspired by Z Racer, which was a crypto horse racing game, if you haven't heard of it. I believe they started building all of this on Ethereum, but the plan is to have the finished product on Arbitrum. As mentioned already, this idea started amongst some OG Ohmies, and so it's not too surprising that the project will heavily involve Olympus DAO. Olympus DAO, if you're not very familiar with the protocol, is trying to establish itself as the go-to Web3 decentralized reserve asset. I suppose what they mean by reserve asset is an asset that protocols can hold in their reserves or treasuries and trust that it's a thing that will maintain its value and won't be censorable and is a safe way to store the project's reserves. That's a very simple view of Olympus DAO. And they're trying to achieve that goal in two different stages. Here they say the distribution stage and the utilization stage. We're going to dive into it briefly because I think it helps us understand where Halls of Olympia fits into the bigger Ohm ecosystem. In the distribution stage, users deposited their assets into the Olympus DAO treasury. Those assets might have been DAI or ETH or Frax or whatever else the treasury was trying to gather, but basically it was a set of varied decentralized coins. In return, Olympus DAO distributed the Ohm token to users, which represented a portion of the treasury that they'd built up. In that process, there was actually a lot more going on, but that's a good enough understanding for us to see where Halls of Olympia fits into all of this. And so basically the distribution stage was a cycle of depositing assets into the treasury and then distributing Ohm coins to the users that deposited. So that happened over and over again, to the point where Olympus DAO built up a massive treasury, which is now, even in the bottom of the bear market, worth $250 million. And on the other side of that, there's tons of Ohm out there, which represents a portion of that $250 million treasury. I didn't ever follow Olympus DAO too carefully, so if one of you guys has a more accurate description of what's going on, feel free to post it in the comments below. But basically, that was the distribution stage. And now they're ready to go into the utilization stage. And the idea of this stage is that now that a ton of Ohm is out there and it's backed by a reliable treasury, it's now ready to be integrated into a whole bunch of other projects and services and actually function as a reserve asset. So back to this diagram, there's tons of Ohm out there held by users, but not yet any ways to use it. So the utilization stage is building functionality for Ohm. I don't know exactly what they're building. I don't keep track of this project in particular, but I assume they're trying to get it functioning as a collateral asset. Maybe you can borrow it or lend against it, hold it in reserves. They might be trying to create some real world functionality where you can buy everyday goods with it or buy some goods with it. And we definitely know they're trying to build some social or recreational use of it as well. And that's where Halls of Olympia fits in this whole big Olympus ecosystem. It's hopefully going to give OM a very functional use case. Back to their vision, they say in any economy, leisure and entertainment are vital to allow the more creative side of humanity to be expressed. And Halls of Olympia is aiming to facilitate this expression. And so it's not really just hoping to be a game or a series of games, but they say here they're hoping it becomes a social hub around which multiple human needs in the realm of art and entertainment and connection can be met. So that's a very massive goal. And it's not a very common goal as far as I know. At least most games that are being built in the crypto space aren't heading towards this trajectory. I suppose you could say metaverse projects are doing something like this, but not quite in this way. So it's an intriguing project. With all that background, now I think we can understand how and why Halls of Olympia is built in this particular way. They had the 3 pillars we looked at before of sporting events, metaverse experience, and betting, and that now they dive into that a little bit in the vision. In regards to gaming, which I think parallels to sporting events, they say that within Halls of Olympia, the central product is the game. And their idea seems to be to build a suite of games which are ancient Greece themed, but involve some sort of spectacle element where it becomes an event to view this sport that's happening, whatever it is, chariot races or gladiatorial combat. And these games or these sports will sometimes be deterministic, a bit like Z-Run, or sometimes be more social and competitive, like a normal PvP game, and maybe even having the option of the two. In regard to social spaces, or the parallel I think is metaverse experience, the goal of Halls of Olympia is to provide a medium for human interaction around shared interests, activities, and desires. It's a little bit hard to understand what that means. I'm assuming it'll be a social media-esque platform, at least to start with, and then it'll broaden out into a VR experience, which they mention a little bit further down. That's speculation though, we'll see what actually happens. But the idea of this social space is that it's a place where people can come and gather around a shared interest and find community around that. That's a massive goal, and currently kind of vague, but I think I'm seeing how this fits together. And finally, the betting aspect. You can bet on these sporting events or races or whatever, but it's interesting that they mention infinite customizability. So I'm assuming that means you can bet on all sorts of intricate details about different games, and that could be a really interesting way to draw people into these games as well. I'm imagining a kind of fantasy football type thing, but on steroids. So you can kind of see where they're going. It's not just about the game, and it's not just about playing the game, but it's about having a community and an event built around the game, where people gather, socialise, bet, and enjoy the playing of the game as well as the watching of the game. And at the end, they also mention community givebacks, where a small portion of the revenue is given back to the OM community. And this kind of just shows how integrated they are into the OM community and how committed they are to the success of it. We'll touch a bit more on that idea a little bit later. Now we'll get into the game itself a bit, or the games themselves. Here's a few images of what's coming up. I'm not sure if this is concept art or if it's game models, but I imagine it would be fun kitting them out, training them, and throwing them into the arena. But they're still really early stage, so there's probably lots of work to do on it from here. Like you can kind of see the joints that I've highlighted don't quite look right and need to be sorted out. But that's okay, I think, because from everything we've gone through, it seems like their vision is a bit different. It's not like the other Ethlizard investments. They're not going for a game that's going to blow away the Web2 competitors. The game is part of a bigger idea, the idea of building a social hub where people can come and find community. So considering that, I think these models are fit for purpose enough. They're not AAA, but they don't need to be, I don't think. We might be missing the purpose of this project if we expect that they must have AAA quality graphics for it to succeed. And again, it's early in their project, so I'm guessing there's a fair bit of work to do on this stuff. This might even be concept art, I'm not really sure. Their goals show that they've got a pretty clear target market, and that's the Olympus ecosystem. And that's a bit of a double-edged sword. On the positive, they know their community and they're already a part of it. On the negative, the community is quite small, so if they miss, they're probably not going to accidentally hit something else and succeed anyway. I'm assuming if they do hit Olympus and they really succeed there, the plan would be to expand well beyond Olympus. I don't see why they would only restrict themselves to the Olympus ecosystem if the game's a success. In fact, it would be beneficial for the Olympus ecosystem if the game was super successful, drew in a whole bunch of players and gave a whole bunch more demand for the OHM token. I imagine that would really push it towards being a functional and desirable reserve asset. The core game loop is pretty simple. You buy a gladiator, upgrade the gladiator, fight or race, and then you collect your winnings and you buy another gladiator, or maybe you keep the same one and you just upgrade it further. So again, early stage, there's no more details on it. This is basically the same game loop as every crypto game in the space, I suppose. Its sustainability will come down to, as always, how fun the loop is, basically how much it engages the Olympus ecosystem or maybe the broader gaming market, and how well the economy is designed. Based on their background in the Olympus ecosystem, I'm guessing the economy side will be pretty well taken care of. I'm assuming they've got a lot of good eyes looking over it, and we'll see that in their partnerships a bit later on. So I think the biggest variable is how fun the game's going to be, and it's just too early to tell. I love the idea. We've seen Z-Run take off, and in my mind, this is Z-Run, but with the whole social aspect of horse racing built in as well. So not just watching and betting on the horse races, but going to the racetrack with your friends, hanging out, watching, betting, all of that. The potential for it to be really accessible and really easy to enjoy is there. It's just if they pull it off or not. I'm not really going to talk about the avatars and chariot. It's a bit too early to get into that. I'm sure all these details will change, so I'll skip over that for now. The first game was due out in Q3 2022, but they've had a bunch of setbacks, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so the new timeline, they tell me, is somewhere around Q1 or Q2 2023. That also means the gladiatorial combat, which was due out in 2023, will be pushed back as well. Maybe it'll still make it in late 2023, but in my head, I'll just assume it's 2024. And then they'll have a whole bunch of other sporting event type things happening as well. Archery, running, pole vault. It's not exactly my thing, but I can see how this would draw a lot of people in. I mentioned already that their roadmap is pretty far behind for reasons I'll get to. But what I want to notice here is that the distance from the avatar drop to the chariot racing being released is a pretty short time. There's roughly 6 months there, maybe, give or take. So that's another hint for me that this isn't aiming to be a AAA game. If it was AAA, that timeline would be years. So this makes it really different to the investments that Ethlizards has made in the past. With our other investments, and I'm even assuming this with the investments that haven't been revealed yet, we're investing in games that are directly competing with Web 2 counterparts and just trying to be a better game. And Lizcoin, one of our council members, has confirmed that with me in chat as well. This is definitely not the same investment thesis that Ethlizards has made for other games. I'm going to dive into the avatar airdrop now for a little bit, because this is just the Bitcoin chart to give us some perspective on the bigger Bitcoin picture of when all this is happening. On the 4th of April, they minted their avatars, but unfortunately they didn't mint out as expected, probably just due to market conditions. Everything was on the way down. They paused the minting, took a breath, rethought their direction, and decided on the 10th of April to instead do a seed round. And they offered a refund to anyone who bought the initial avatar. Or if they decided to hold on to their avatar, they would get some bonuses down the line. In late April, they managed to oversubscribe their seed round offer. But then on the 7th of May, Luna crashed and the market took another dive, which I'm sure we all remember. Then in May, when they tried to collect on those seed round offers, they found that I think it was 3/4 or 2/3 of the investors pulled out. And so their seed round didn't go as planned either. At this point, they were left in a pretty bad position in terms of funding. The impressive thing is they didn't give up on that, and they pursued other people to invest in this seed round. And then sometime around early October, the Ethlizards, along with a few other projects, which we'll look at in a second, invested, and that's given them runway for about another year. But they're still in the process of raising further funds. So in the short term, they're good, and in the medium term, they're looking to find more investors. Thinking about the partners they've brought on, this is a screenshot from their last Medium article. If you're watching this, you probably know who the Ethlizards are. We're a Gamefi, DeFi, VC DAO. So the reason for Ethlizards to invest seems pretty obvious. You might have heard of Treasure DAO too. I don't know the project in any depth, but basically it's an ecosystem of metaverse projects that are built on top of a shared currency, which is called Magic, and on top of shared assets, which they call treasures, basically NFTs. And these guys are Arbitrum based as well. So I think maybe we could expect to see some Magic and treasures in Halls of Olympia as well. That's just speculation. But this investment makes sense too. It's a Gamefi DAO on Arbitrum, and Halls of Olympia is a game on Arbitrum. The unusual partnership is GMX. If you're into DeFi, you've definitely heard of them by now. But if you haven't heard of them, they're a decentralized perpetuals exchange. And they're the biggest native project on Arbitrum, I think. But as far as I know, they have nothing to do with gaming, and they don't really invest in other projects. So this is another hint for me that this project is much bigger than a gaming project. The games are going to be a significant part of it, but from GMX's investment, I'm assuming the betting is going to be an important part of it. And there's probably going to be some complexity to the betting as well, which we saw hinted at earlier in the light paper. Probably not just who's the winner, who's the loser, but all sorts of complicated betting options. But if GMX is backing it, and also if you notice down the bottom, Dopex is backing it as well, which is an options exchange, I think we'll see some pretty innovative sports betting from this project. On top of that, GMX being so big at the moment, if they push it or if they retweet the project or if they make something of the partnership, I think Halls of Olympia will get a lot of eyes on it pretty quick. So their current roadmap's blown out of the water. It's Q3 and the chariot racing game is still about 6 months out. But I think that's okay. They've overcome a lot of obstacles and they haven't stopped working on it. So I'm not too worried that the roadmap's far behind. And I think this light paper's a bit old anyway. Here's a couple more screenshots of... Here's a couple more pictures of in-game models. And they finish off by introducing the core members of their team. I did a superficial search for these guys, and it doesn't seem like they're doxed or anything, not as far as I could find. So not much for me to say about the team directly, but I did do a bunch of reading back on their Discord, and Yams seems to be the main active guy on Discord, and he does an amazing job at communicating with the community. He's always calm, he's always helpful, and I didn't see him take swipes at anyone. And that was even with a whole bunch of heated comments being thrown around when the avatars didn't mint out. Also, I had a really short chat with him in DM, and again, super helpful guy. So I don't know about their previous work at all, but from what I can see, at least from what Yams is representing of them, it seems like the team has a good attitude in tough times and always has a positive approach to the community, which I think is a very good sign in my opinion. And that's it for their white paper. But before I share my first impressions with you, if you've found it helpful, if you've liked it, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. Okay, let's keep going. Here's my basic thoughts. They had a super rough start. They misread the market with the avatar launch. They needed it to sell out for funding, but it didn't sell out. Then they had a bunch of bad luck with the seed round raise and running into the Luna crash. But they persevered through all of that, and they're still building, and they're still looking for investors, and they're still grinding. So had a bad start, but have basically made the best of it, I think. On the project as a whole, I think we need to think of it differently than we think of our other gaming investments. Firstly, it's part of a much bigger ecosystem, and not in the sense of Illuvium Zero is part of a bigger ecosystem, because there's Illuvium Overworld and then Illuvium Arena and all that stuff. But it's part of a really big and diverse ecosystem, which includes stuff that has nothing to do with games at all. And that's the Olympus DAO ecosystem. And I think this is a bit of a double-edged sword, because if Ohm is successful, this game is more likely to be successful. If Ohm and Olympus is not successful, then that's definitely going to hurt this game too. It could survive it, but it would have to pivot pretty hard. Personally, I haven't got a good reading on Ohm. I don't know if it's on the way up or if it's on the way down. But I'm pretty sure the success of Ohm and Olympus is going to heavily impact the success of this game. Another reason to think of it differently is because it's not quite a game. As we mentioned before, it's really aiming to be a social hub. It's aiming to be a game plus this space where people can come together and build a community. And that makes it a pretty unique idea in the Web3 world. Maybe not totally unique. I guess you'd just say metaverse projects are trying to do the same thing. But their approach to it and the fact that they're building on an existing ecosystem or building out an existing ecosystem and approaching it from the foundation of a game is pretty unique. And I think that's mostly a positive. But those things also make it high risk, high reward. It's a really niche market. They're initially just aiming for Ohm ecosystem users and giving the Ohm token more functionality. And that could be really good because they know who they're going after. They're embedded in that ecosystem already. They have the support of that ecosystem. There's no competitors. There's a bunch of positives to it. But it could also be a negative because it's a really small target to hit. I'm assuming, though, if they do hit it, they're going to expand into the broader crypto space and then into the broader gaming space and so on. One really big element of the high risk is that the path to success is a bit unsure. Because it's kind of unique, it's hard to build a framework for seeing how this will succeed or not succeed. For a regular Web3 game, after the basic failure of Gen 1 crypto games, you basically know what needs to happen for it to succeed. The game's got to be fun and the economy's got to be manageable and sustainable. And those things are true for this game, but I'm not sure if that's enough for it to succeed because it's just so different and it doesn't quite fit into that box. So the path to success for this game is unsure. But at the same time, that's why we're all here. We're all here, in Ethlizards anyway, for the high risk, high reward plays. That's why it's a seed round VC investment DAO and not a DAO that's flipping NFTs for existing projects or investing in stablecoin yields or whatever. Ethlizards is made for high risk, high reward. So we're playing in the right space. And this is exactly the risk that you should expect when you're buying into Ethlizards. Not financial advice, by the way. So that's my first impressions of Halls of Olympia. They had a rough start. It's a project that you have to think about a bit differently to understand. And it's very high risk, high reward. So if you're thinking about aping into their ALAN pool when it comes out, they mentioned that in their last Medium article, make sure you think through those things and have a good framework in mind for what you think is going to happen. If you liked that, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.